Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of Philip Sanderson from the band Stormbugs, because I recently spoke to him to find out more about life, love, poetry and all that other groovy stuff. Was around in the late 70s, releasing various records and cassettes, obsessed with cassettes and compilations and all that malarkey, and is still making music to this day. But you're going to find out more about Stormbugs, Philip, and everything else. So sit back, relax and enjoy. So after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to the exciting subject of the early formative years. Philip, it's over to you.
Okay, so I was born in 60, so I'm just a little bit older, but that means in 1970, 71, I was 10, 11. Which tallied with moving from the little primary school to the big boys' school. Always quite a cultural shock. But I think during the 60s, I hadn't really paid any attention to music. I can't claim that, I was teeny bopping. But around 10, 11, maybe it's those hormones going, I suddenly became, we were all, and it was everyone thinks that their time was a golden time, but actually looking back on it, it probably was true at this point, So we come in on with Mark Bolan, Electric Warrior, first album, The Slider. Then, of course, there's the Bowie thing. I remember the thing was that, of course, people used to lend albums to each other at school. Even people you didn't really like, you would swap albums with them.
Yes.
And unless you completely trashed it, nobody was too worried. And I remember my first sighting of a David Bowie album was people would have these big Adidas bags and the album would stick out of the top. And I can remember seeing this album and it was the back of the Ziggy cover. And I at a distance, I thought it was a sort of Louis the something Baroque window with a figure standing in it. It was only got closer, I saw
Yes.
it was. And the seal of approval was, of course, so we had a very strict French master called Mr. Browning, XRAF. And this would have been a year or so later, and someone had brought in Aladdin Sane and had it on the desk as he came into the room. And somehow, even though it was at the back of the room, he spotted it and said, "Get that disgusting thing off the desk now." Which, of course, was an instant seal of approval. But
yes,
it was the usual. People, when I've spoken to other people, they always go, so what were the early influences? And, if you've done anything kind of vaguely experimental, you're supposed to mention Stockhausen and Pierre Schaeffer, Pierre Henry and things like that. But your chances of your chances of hearing those in the Medway Towns in 1973 were zero. They weren't even in the library. There wasn't such a thing as that. But so, one shifted from Bowie to Eno, of course, and then there were those wonderful the Faust tapes, the Virgin 49pers, weren't they?
Yes.
49 or was it 99p? Anyway, it was ridiculously cheap. So everyone had a copy of the Faust tapes. Everyone had Camembert Electric. The gong thing, obviously, and yes, I was quite keen on all those different things, and particularly Kraftwerk. But these seem to occupy different fields. So when there suddenly became talk of Eno and Bowie working together, and even potentially working with Kraftwerk, this would be about 75, 6 or something, I suppose. One got very excited, and it was about that time I started making music. So most people, will sensibly say, oh, yes, I joined this band and I was playing bass or guitar. I was kind of never really a musician in that sense. So my first thing was my parents bought me one of these cassettes, the little Philips cassettes. It's like a small cassette player recorder with just one control. So you don't have separate buttons, you have one. And I soon discovered, well, you could cover the erase head so you could record something and then overdub something.
right.
You can't obviously hear what you've got underneath, so it doesn't really work. You couldn't lay down a guitar part, now the vocal, but you could lay down a sort of drone or a noise sound of some sort and then add another layer and then add another layer and so on and so forth. And I found you could take the back off and there was a little flywheel, which is the rubber, there's a drive belt. And if you put a little bit of tape on the flywheel, it sort of created a little wobble and you got a kind of vibrato sort of effect.
Right.
Or what you could do is with this one control, there was a record button that you had to push down. You were supposed to push record, the little red button down, and press it into play. But if you sort of press the right button down and tweak the thing, it would go into record and fast forward simultaneously. And then, of course, when you played the sound back, you had to have about 5 hands to do this. Once you were dinging the lampshade, once you did this, you've got to slow down thing. So I also would I think it's called circuit bending now, but basically you take a wire from somewhere in the circuit and tentatively touch it to another part of the circuit board, and it often does not make an interesting sound. Sometimes there'd be a kind of hot electrical burning smell, so you quickly took the wire away. Fortunately, the circuits in that period were quite robust. They're mostly discrete components, individual resistors and capacitors, not just an IC. So I made lots of stuff like that. People at school were in bands and things, but for some reason I was kind of very much making these recordings, and that was like went down to the flea market, and you could get these old reel-to-reels, which are probably made in the 1950s, 60s. Mm-hmm. Terrible quality. I mean, they were worse than the cassette, but you could make the tape loop because they were reel-to-reels. You could make a tape loop, and I think I got a copy of Discrete Music, the Eno album. I don't know if you know the one. Yeah. And on the back, it's got a diagram of a tape delay system. Now, he borrowed that from Terry Riley, but basically you have 2 tape recorders, one on the left. That records, and then you stretch the tape across the room to the second tape recorder, which is on playback. So it's like a very long echo delay. So I went down the flea market and got a couple of these knackered tape recorders and made one of those. So that was kind of what I was doing 16, 17. And I would play it to friends, and they go, yeah. The best that they would normally say was, oh, that sounds like the bit at the beginning of such and such a record.
Right.
Quite often at the beginning of even quite straightforward records, there'd be a little bit of noisy, avant-y sound.
Yes.
So yeah, I did that. That's taking us through to 76, 77, and then 78. I go finish my A levels in the usual business and go to Goldsmiths College in South London, and at the time there wasn't. Now you could do BA in Sonic Arts and BA in Music and Sonic Arts. Those kind of courses, those didn't exist then. Yes, but what I had done is I looked up. In the library, presumably. I was going to say on the internet. No, in the library. In the library. I looked it up. And there were about 3 or 4 universities in the UK that had electronic music studios. These were kind of loosely modelled, I suppose, on those famous European electronic music studios. The one in Paris under the Pompidou. There was one in Berlin. But you couldn't study, as I said, a course in them. But I thought, well, if I went to a university that had one of these, I'm sure I could, as you kind of think in that reckless enthusiasm when you're 18 that you could do anything, I'm sure I'd be able to use it, I thought. So I signed up to go to Goldsmiths to do psychology, and sure enough, go along to the electronic music studio, and you had to sign up for an evening course, but that was fair enough. And then I spoke to the technician, and it turned out that the studio was empty most days. Third-year music students could opt to do an option in there, but most of them didn't. So it was kind of empty. So I said, "Oh, is it all right if I come in now?" And then it was like, okay. And after he realised I wasn't going to burn the place down, he'd let me go in a couple of times a week. So I had the place to myself. He'd go off to the pub often at lunchtime. And the setup they had there was the British synthesizer, the VCS3. This is the one that looks like a sort of. Are you familiar with the VCS3?
No, I'm not.
It looks a bit like a piece of test equipment. It banks up like you'll have seen. What you will have seen is the Roxy Music on Top of the Pops.
Yes,
doing Virginia Plain, and Eno's twiddling the knobs on. Yeah, that's a VCS3.
Right, there you go.
And they were used for all the Doctor Who music. and up until they got, keyboardy synths. Anyway, they had a load of those. Well, they had 3, and they had at that point they didn't have multi-track, but they had Revoxes. And with my student grant, I also bought myself a Revox, a refurbished one that had been sitting in some Soho studio, providing echo, and a guy checked it out, fiddled with the heads, and I think it was, even back then, it was £100. It's quite a lot in
That is a lot of
1986.
money. Yes, absolutely.
That must have been about an eighth of my student grant. Anyway, so I was busy, doing that. And then on the back of that was the whole cassette thing started to happen. Now, I don't quite know exactly how it happened, but somehow a little network built up and people would send you tapes and you'd send them tapes and so on. And I did I had this idea, I'll do a compilation every 6 months, I said ambitiously.
Yes.
So Snatch 1 came out in 1979. And I think it was one of the, it was one of the first tapes. It's just probably being keen and being in the right place, not claiming any what have you. But yes, it was one of the first cassettes, and that did reasonably well. And then in 1980, did Snatch 2. Now, by then, the whole thing was in full flow. I can't quite remember exactly when, but, NME and Sounds both had I think Sounds had DIY Corner, and I think NME had Garage Land, which was basically a page each week, which they would devote to cassettes and or indie singles. And so if you got a listing in there, sure enough, people would send you their £2 or £2.50, including postage, and you'd mail them off a tape. The Snatch 2 was perhaps the epitome of that. And there were people like Graham Massey, who was in a variety of bands, Biting Tongues, the Beach Surgeons. He went on to fame and presumably some fortune with 808 State, that's kind of see techno-y, which I don't know much about, but I know they were kind of quite whatever. So yes, and we had Seeing Wires and
the Lemon Kittens as well.
Yes, well, at that time I was living in most people thought it was a squat, but actually it was just a very rundown flat that an old lady had lived in, and basically hadn't done any decoration. But it was in Paddington, and it was about a 5-minute walk from the station. And so people would just drop in. I mean, I guess because they couldn't, I don't think we even had a phone. So really the only way was for people to come by. And Carl Blake and Danielle Dax were, I think, living in Reading at his mother's. Just don't quote me on that, but
yes,
they were in Reading. I think that's where he comes from. And so they would come to London via Paddington. So, now and then they would just drop by. Various people would just basically rock up. The doorbell would go and it'd be, oh, hi, I saw your thing in the NME, or your listing in the NME or whatever.
Did your cassette also have your address on it as well?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
yes.
Brilliant. Yeah, I know this is very strange looking back to these moments, because a lot of these kind of, I don't know, there was quite an alternative scene in East Anglia during the 70s. And, people would start these, papers which were environmental, a bit political, a bit folky, putting on fairs and festivals. And they always have just everyone's address on. Because, again, people didn't have phones. We all went to phone boxes with 2p pieces and the hope that no one else was in the phone box. Otherwise, we were a bit stuffed.
Yeah. Being at that point in fairly central London, that was very good. And Rough Trade, of course, was a half-hour walk away, I suppose.
Yes.
And so we got a little board made up. It was kind of wooden board with 3 of the cassettes covers mounted on there, and they stuck that up. And it was that attracted the attention of Mike Allway from Cherry Red Records, who bought the 3 cassettes. Now, the 3 cassettes that came out in 1980, there was Snatch 2, there was a Stormbugs cassette, Slow Music by David Jackman, and this other cassette, which purported to be by a couple called Claire Thomas and Susan Vezey. Now, these were a phantom couple, which I'd invented on Snatch 1, because I had an extra track I wanted to put on there. And I felt it was a bit much to have 2 tracks, one by Stormbugs and, So I kind of, just on a whim, really, invented these 2 women who were supposed to be kind of pre-Raphaelite synthesizer players. And I wrote a kind of little press release. But it was all, I would have thought anybody could have seen straight through it. Instantly. It wasn't intended to be a sophisticated scam or anything. No. But the what gave it credence was that the album reprint, the cassette album reprint, was mostly just quite hardcore electronic music. But there was one track which had some rather nice floating vocals called Bright Waves. And what had happened there was that a friend of a friend had come to stay in the flat over the summer. And I said to her one evening, we didn't really have much in common. I seem to remember her favourite group was the Rolling Stones. Nothing wrong with those. I suppose we've got used to that now. But at the time, that was a bit like, oh, yeah, the Rolling Stones, in 1980. But I said to her, she was going on about how she sang in a choir. And I thought, oh, okay. Do you fancy singing a few phrases into the microphone? And so she did, and she sang a few things which kind of oohs and ahs and what have you. And then I went off and put them through a tape delay system and built this kind of layered sound, which was quite nice. That was on the cassette. So it lent credence to the existence of this.
What, the track with Claire Thomas, that track, did she record on that track?
Yes, the woman in question was actually, because Claire Thomas and Susan Vezey had been invented before I'd met this woman.
Yes.
And I'd had the electronic music for the cassette that they were supposedly going to put out. I added this track. The woman in question was actually called Nancy. She wasn't Claire or Susan. Anyways, to what have you, it was Mike Allway from Cherry Red Records, who then went on to do the whole other label,
Yes, this is because I just got a book from someone who's done the other label, L Records.
That's it. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
Yes.
Anyways, he was very keen on that kind of thing. He was they had Felt at the time. Anyway,
and also, did you come across Simon Fisher Turner and Colin Lloyd Tucker? I think I got, because they decided to invent themselves as 2 French women, and they.
For a long time, that's all been kind of cleared up now. For a long time, I would get emails who thought that the Claire Thomas and Susan Vezey were somehow connected to that project, because it was very similar, except they took it a lot further by dressing up and
performing live.
We didn't do any of that.
And I think they had made a story that one of them, their mother was Edith Piaf, I think, which was quite weird, but on so many levels. Yeah. So someone was in the water with the 80s inventing these.
So what happened was Mike Allway was very keen, and he was putting together this thing, Perspectives and Distortion. And so he says to me, who is supposed to be the Snatch Tapes man, he said, "Oh, can I put a track by Claire Thomas and Susan Vezey on the compilation?" I thought, well, yeah, of course, What I should really have said at that point is, look, Mike, this is actually just it's a kind of pastiche or parody or something like that. But the whole thing got a bit out of hand. So he kept saying to me, "What can I meet them? Can I meet them?" I think he was very keen probably to meet them and then offer them some sort of lucrative contract. And, and I sort of said, oh, they're in America doing some theatre performance art.
I know, that's why I don't lie, because you realise it starts going, oh, crikey.
Anyway, this went on for about a month, and he was becoming more and more insistent. And so he just keeps, hassling me about this. And so the woman in question was staying in the flat over the summer before she started a job or something. She finished at university. And eventually I said to Nancy, well, look, why don't you go meet Mike Allway? And so she said, oh, okay. So off she goes, and he tries to impress her by taking her to see Quentin Quentin Crisp, who was nominally on Cherry Red at the time. He put out an album.
Yes.
And that went on fine. And then I think it was about 2 or 3 other times that he took her out, and finally she just said, "Look, I'm not." She basically, the whole cover broke for the story. But the album was already in progress, so that went ahead anyway. But not needless to say, that did somewhat sour relations with Cherry Red.
Yes, so close, because that was that time when they had Pillows and Prayers, so there was a lot
that was later. That was the year after. That was the year after Perspectives. Yes.
Right.
So we remained on friendly terms, but in the meantime, despite the cassettes, it also put this out, which was the first Stormbug single. There we are. I don't know if you can see that.
Yes.
And this was very much a DIY job. Now, I had this, even despite the fact of being kind of, an early proponent of cassettes, I kind of felt it was important to get your record out. But it was basically we had no money. So this was kind of half funded through a student grant on the basis that I'd be able to sell some and get the money back. But the pressing plant was called Linguaphone. It was linked to, the Linguaphone records.
Yes.
They had a really good pressing plant. However, what they didn't tell me was that if you were some sort of like indie person, you were at the bottom of the queue. And, as we discussed previously about the phone box, so about every week I'd go to the phone box, get my coins out, ring them up. How's my Stormbug single coming on? Oh, yeah, it'll be soon. It was about 6 months it took them to do it. But there were various other things. So, like, we were talking about T-Rex. And, of course, I'd been looking at T-Rex, and, in all the run-out grooves, you'd see a Porky Prime cut.
Yes.
Which was called Porky, who cut all those wonderful records and managed to get so much kind of volume onto the record. And so I thought, I better get my record cut with Porky. So I went off to Portland Place. And at that time, when you got a record cut, you could go in. Now you send it off and some faceless engineer cuts it. But there you could go in. I don't think he really liked it, to be quite fair. So right, I'll racket this record here. And but he did a really good job of cutting the records. So that was our single there in 1980. So that was kind of very.
So why wasn't that on Snatch Tapes? You put it on Loop Records. Was that?
Well, that's a good question, and I haven't got the answer to that. It was like the record. This is the official cover, which fellow Stormbug Stephen Ball he did this collage, and he had a room in a house with a guy who had a printing firm,
right,
who agreed to print the cover, but in exchange for him doing kind of various deliveries and odd jobs and a bit of cut and pasting work. And again, this was about the record finally arrived, and then this arrived about 6 weeks to 2 months later. And so I had to knock up some other covers on it, sort of photocopied collage work, just to take some down to Rough Trade to get some money back.
Yes. How many did you get printed, by the way?
I think 300. I can't quite remember.
And did it go generally well? Because at that time...
Well, yes and no. I mean, the thing with Rough Trade was at the time you could take in any record. They didn't even listen to it. No wonder they went out of business initially, because you'd take in any record and they'd say, OK, we'll take 25 copies. That was it. They didn't listen to it to give you the money. And the idea was that if they sold, then whatever, they'd take some more copies, which was fine. What was quite interesting was it didn't fly off the shelves, but somehow a copy they had some sort of outlet in the US, Rough Trade USA. I think it was it might even just have been an arrangement with a shop or something. But I went in to try to say, do you want some more? And the guy said, well, I'm not sure we do. He said, but we've had a thing from America and they want 50 copies. I went, that's nice. Wow. And he says, how much are you going to sell them? So I immediately doubled the price that I was charging in the UK. He went, okay. So that helped to pay off some of the, some of the costs. So those 50 copies wafted off to the US. And it was interesting when, many decades later, the whole thing was reactivated. which was, of course, that these records had obviously wormed their way into the collections of various dudes who were interested in left field stuff. Probably some late night thing after they'd gone to the bar and said, "Oh, hey, check out this record by these English dudes, Stormbugs. I bet you haven't heard this one." So there was a kind of level of interest in reissuing the material in the noughties that probably can be, certainly linked back to those 50 copies going to the US.
Well, it's interesting because did you come across the year before in '79? There was the band called Rima Rima.
Oh yeah,
yes, and they only lasted 8 months and they put out one single, and then I think they were the first band to record on 4AD records.
Yes, yeah.
So that was there, and then all the members went on. They split up, and then all the members went on to do interesting things as well. But then there was a film that came up out a few years ago about Rima Rima and all these people, who went on, like Thirlwell, who went into Fetus, and John Robb, and all these other kind of critically acclaimed producers and artists went, Rima Rima, this was one of the most important records that I ever heard. Yeah, this was my top 10 record. So it's kind of interesting, just one release just has this traction, and then people have put out a compilation. They managed to cobble together enough material, and someone said, make a film, which seemed rather ambitious, but it's an enjoyable movie. So it's interesting, your 50 copies, which are now selling for nearly £90 on Discogs.
Yes, that one, yeah. We did, because how it worked with the cassettes, it was really, people say, well, how many cassettes did you sell? And I wasn't keeping records, but what worked really well was that down the road from where I lived in Paddington, there was Better Badges, who made, surprise, all those badges, pin badges at the time. But they also had some tape copying machines. They were fast copying machines. But what it meant was that if you got an order for, 10 tapes or something, you'd whiz down to, or walk down to Better Badges, copy a 10 or 20 tapes, and then send them off. And people would have sent you either cash, in the envelope, or a check or postal order or something. Maybe, I don't know.
Postal order, yes, the classic. or coins taped onto a bit of cardboard.
So it was all very doodah. It was kind of money in, money out very quickly. But we then did a follow-up single in 81, which is why I said, well, we were almost on the verge of indie. This was called Tin. Whereas this one was very much kind of me doing nearly all the music, and Stephen doing the cover. This was much more of a collaborative thing with Stephen Ball. And what we tried to do was try to sort of mix, because the industrial thing was kind of in full throttle, but and Stormbugs were quite industrial, but I was already getting fed up of it in 1981. In some senses, some kids were just getting into it, and us, to my amazement, some of the bands are still doing kind of the same thing. Some 40 years later.
44 years later, yes.
I guess it becomes a bit like going to church. After a while, you're just going. It becomes comforting too. But anyway, so what I tried to do there was I'd made a tape loop I had a set of bongos, and using the techniques I mentioned earlier of speeding up, slowing down, I kind of made a drum loop. And then the idea was to have a drum loop and then have this sort of almost like a rockabilly guitar on top. And that became this, Tin. The B-side is more maybe what you'd expect, kind of scratchy kind of sounds.
Is that Car Situation?
That's the one, Car Situations.
Right.
But there's, at the risk of becoming like John Otway in this early stage, there's another story, because what had happened was, during the year 1980, I'd been corresponding with Sordid Sentimental, which is this micro-European label that did a couple of Throbby Gristles things. Did they do a Certain Ratio or something? Anyway, they were well regarded, and they used to make these lovely records, but in lavish covers with very European. Anyway, and I'd been writing to this guy, Jan Farsi, who was involved in Sordid Sentimental. He said, "Oh yes, we'd like to put this record out." I was like, "Wow, this is good." Excellent. So we went all that, recorded the thing, actually used, I think, a multi-track, an 8-track. But I think we only had like a half a day to record it. Anyway, sent it off. Anyway, then in late 1981, the records rock up. But they're not on Sordid Sentimental. They're on a different label called L'Invitation au Suicide, which basically means invitation to suicide, which is an unfortunate. This is the very first record on that label.
Right.
Which actually then had some traction. I think he had a band called Christian Death.
Right, yes.
Who were actually quite popular, I think.
Very.
But this was his first record. And so, anyway, it arrived not on Sordid Sentimental. What had happened was basically that Jan Farsi had decided he was involved with Sordid Sentimental, but he decided to set up his own label. Fair enough. But he had decided that we were going to be the first release, but he hadn't told us that. So it arrived on a different label, and we'd sent in the artwork, but he decided he was going to do his own collage artwork. So it arrived with this 10-inch sleeve with kind of sub-Joy Division artwork. You know, Joy Division were kind of flirting with kind of Nazi iconography.
Yes, the right.
Yes, well, this had a bit of that. And so Stephen and I, were both, you know, whatever, open to things, but we're like, what the F is... But the record, and bizarrely, he did, I guess, I mean, as you discover quite often, the people you dealt with in the UK were often from a similar background, i.e., lower middle class, working class, didn't have much money.
Yes.
Really, scrabbling together. Quite often the Europeans you dealt with, it was like, oh, hang on a minute, these are actually quite rich kids. Mummy and Daddy have given them the money to do this enterprise. So, he printed up 1,500 of these, which seemed to me like quite a lot at the time. And I never did find out where they all went, because, I mean, I think we had 30 or something, you know. But, yeah, this is this went on... I mean, numbers are kind of tiny now, aren't they? But this went on YouTube a few years, about 10 or 12 years ago, and clocked up about 20,000, which was quite a lot at the time. You know, now 20,000.
So what was the so the artwork on Discogs is this young woman? Is that the one that you wanted or didn't want?
No, the one on the one on Discogs is there's a young Nazi woman, like she's one of the. You know their version of the Brownies, the Nazis.
Yeah.
The version of the Brownies.
They were very keen on nature, weren't they? The Nazi youth.
So it's a blonde-haired young girl.
Yes.
With I think some kind of Nazi. I'm not sure if it's Nazi or if it's a cross, but it's not a Christian cross. Anyway, she's holding out a tin. Basically, it's from a Nazi poster.
Yeah, and the lettering is also of a.
Yes. And he did a collage in the middle, which is like, was very poor. I mean, you know, but even my collage, I do quite a bit of collage myself. It's a very naff collage. And on the back, there was a picture of, I actually found the original, well, not the actual original, but the whole picture. I was in the Imperial War Museum 2 or 3 years ago, and they had a thing on the Holocaust. And there's a picture, and it's of Hungarian Jews. It's a grainy black and white picture, and then one of them has the Star of David on them. Anyway, that was a picture from that. So it was very ambiguous as to what it was saying. I mean, it probably wasn't as pro as, you know, there's a Joy Division thing with the drummer, isn't there?
Yes, that's right.
It wasn't as pro as that, because it was kind of ambiguous as to, you know, we had the nice woman girl on the front, and then we have the, you know, obviously the repercussions on the back to some degree, but it was all. But I mean, long and short of it, wasn't anything that we wanted anywhere near the sleeve.
No. So that's a guy called, what's his name? Jan Farsi.
Jan Farsi, yes, he went on, as I say, to some success with Christian Death. Though I did one time, you know, as you do, I looked, and apparently they had a terrible time with him. He left them in America or somewhere halfway through a tour.
Right.
Without enough money to get home, and they had to like get jobs in a kind of fast food joint or something to get sufficient money to get back to Blighty.
Blimey, that's an amazing idea. Could imagine these wild goths in 1980 serving McDonald's, yes, my God. So that's your a brush with the wonderful world of record labels, really. There.
Well, what then happened was that had to move from Paddington. I was living in Deptford, and I was still doing loads of recording and stuff. And we did Snatch 3 in 1981. Now with Snatch 3, whereas the previous ones had been photocopied covers, which I just did down the road at the newsagents or whatever. And as I said, the tapes are better badge. We thought we'd go a bit pro. We thought we'd print the cover. Ooh. And we'd screen print the labels and we'd do a poster. So I went down the screen printing workshop at the Albany, which is still there, but this was a different site, and screen printed off a nice Snatch 3 poster. Printing the cover proved to have its own problems. You had to have the text typeset. And so it took forever. But when you're in your 20s, time seems to be passing very quickly. And towards the end of 81, I was spending 2 or 3 hours a day replying to people about their cassettes. They'd send me, they'd always want a letter back.
Right.
You're a tape, and it's like, can you send a letter back? I go, okay, do a letter back. And I waxed lyrical and probably very pretentiously about something. And I kind of got towards the end of 81, and I thought, oh, God, I can't be doing this forever. And the other thing was that when the cassette first came out, I think in a very utopian way, one had a sense that maybe it was going to change the dynamics of music distribution.
Yes.
Now, I'm just saying that sounds pretentious and ridiculous, but there was a possibility of that. And I think maybe even the music papers thought there was a small possibility of that. And one of the reasons, this is not a conspiracy theory, but one of the reasons maybe they dropped the cassette DIY corner and Garageland was because, of course, what funds the NME back then was, of course, 50,000 people buying it, but also all the ads.
Yes.
But nobody in Garageland was buying any advertising space.
No.
So I think they began to think, hang on a minute. And I could see this future spanning out of just endless spending hours each day sending cassettes to people. And it seemed to have lost that kind of disruptor thing. And also, as I said, I was already tiring of the kind of black and white, pseudo-bondagey, slightly dodgy Nazi collage stuff. So I went off and did a couple of other projects. One with this chanteuse called Naomi. And then I had best friends who were at art college. And because they knew I could, operate a tape recorder and things, I'd be asked to do some music and things. So I did a few little soundtracks, both for their things. And then eventually in kind of the mid to late 80s, again with Stephen from Stormbug, Stephen Ball, we made this little experimental film called Green on the Horizon, which, in the experimental short film thing did quite well, was shown at festivals and got shown at the Tate. And I think it was shown at the BFI about 3 or 4 years ago. But so right. I kind of moved, I still was keeping touch with people like the New Blockaders, Nigel Jacklin from Alien Brains. And I still would occasionally go off and we do one of these things where basically you just improvise some kind of noise thing on the spot, normally to an audience of a very small number of people, 20 people at best. So I was still keeping my hand in on that, but was kind of drifting away from that. Because it was quite interesting. I was talking to somebody and who was probably a lot younger, in their 30s, and they were very much romanticising this early 80s period, saying, oh, wasn't it great? There were all these fanzines and, underground squats and all of this, and, thinking, oh, this must have been a great time. But actually, it was actually fairly depressing, wasn't it?
Oh, it was hideous. It was like, I mean, it was politically hideous, but we had a great soundtrack. I mean, you've got to remember, Thatcher got in 79. There was the Falkland War. There was this really, over the top kind of excitement from a lot of people and the media about the Falkland War. Then the miners' strike. There was Greenham Common. There was a huge amount of unemployment. I think the reason there were so many bands that began in the 80s and had that period was there was so much unemployment that, most kids on the left who didn't want to have a career and couldn't be bothered just signed on and got job seekers allowance, enterprise allowance schemes. And suddenly it was like, going to happy hour at the pub. I mean, there was a lot of kind of venues and indie nights, around, scattered in art centres and community centres. So a lot of sort of towns and cities would have something like that. And there was an audience because it was there was a lot of us unemployed kids not really feeling that ambitious about life or optimistic. And then, as you say, there was like the NME Melody Maker Sounds, huge circulations. So you had these kind of like, I don't know, I mean, it was a way that, music could be really generated to a massive readership. And then you had John Peel, Kid Jensen, Janice Long. But John Peel, again, a kid, somebody making a sort of, as I say, most bands have that 5-year narrative in the 80s. They get together, 12-month honeymoon period. They get a single on John Peel. They think, oh my God, that's all we wanted. And a session at the Maid of Vale. Oh, let's do the album. Let's do the little tour in the transit van. It's not... it sounds slightly romantic, but actually at the time, that was kind of a thing, wasn't it? Because you didn't think, oh, I must get up for work tomorrow. Oh, I've got ambition to get a job.
I think in London it was a little bit different because there was, of course, that going on, the signing on and the enterprise allowance, but it was also quite easy to pick up temp jobs. There was Holborn Job Centre had a temp desk run by this woman who, I don't know, she decided independently, but basically you could go in there and if you had your basic 6.0s, 2As, or maybe even just 6.0 levels, they would fix you up. I mean, they were normally in civil service things where they needed somebody for 6 weeks to 2 months to do some ghastly administrative task that nobody else wanted to do, like, we've got all these files here. You identify all the ones that end in G, X, Q, X and separate those, and then blah, 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 blah. But quite often what would happen was you'd get these jobs and they'd have taken on 2 or 3 people and they'd just leave you to it, in a room somewhere. So it could be a bit of a... So that would provide a bit of an income spurt, shall we say.
Yes.
Because even though it never seemed to go very far. But anyway, so in the 80s, I was kind of... the music I was making was more for, as I say, it was still very much recording based, but it was for these little films and things. And where are we? Yeah, a few years ago, this came out. Here we are. On one of these bends, which was on a Canadian label called Seance Centre, and they pulled together. That's the Flat in Paddington. They pulled together a number of the tracks which were recorded for these different little films.
Oh, nice.
And this is quite. It was interesting. This was interesting in the sense they did 500 copies of this, but they did a lot. Maybe I think it was one of their early releases. They've done quite a few now. But they really worked the kind of social media and things and all the, that kind of stuff you're meant to do. Yes. And it sold pretty quickly. Got reviewed in The Wire and so on.
So what's that compilation called?
It's called On One of These Bends. On One of These Bends.
Oh.
And these are little stills from the films. This is from Green on the Horizon. This is from Shadow Man, Hang Me Turning. Yeah. There is a digital version of this on the Bandcamp site. So it kind of was a link between the first couple of records that I showed you there and the tapes. And, what happened. This is kind of what happened next, really.
Yes.
Though most of this didn't, apart from being on little, as I said, experimental films, soundtracks, this wasn't really released at the time. So they
put a whole collection of your work on one album.
Yeah.
God, that must have felt like really fantastic that someone collated it and done it for you.
Well, this came quite late in the day because what happened was, so doing that sort of stuff in the 90s, I'm mostly doing kind of installation in little kind of alternative art spaces. I'm a sucker for punishment.
Yes.
And then in the late 90s, about 97, I've got this job at the Filmmakers Co-op, and they have a Mac. And I'd only ever had an Amstrad sort of glorified word processor. And as soon as I get the computer calls, I'm kind of like, oh, you could do sound on this, can you? Oh, okay. And the internet's getting going. It's already started, obviously, but it's getting going. So I start tentatively making music again. And then in 2000, we were made aware of this bootleg compilation called I Hate the Pop Group, which brought together all sorts of the Jelly Babies, all kinds of bands, all completely. The guy put it together, hadn't sought permission from anybody. He just put this compilation together with a Stormbugs track on there. And I think this Stormbugs track may, as I said, link back to those 50 copies, because this came out of America, the US. So on the back of that, Stephen and I put together this CD, Let's Go Outside and Get It Over, the finer moments of the Stormbugs stuff from previously. And that seemed to ignite quite a bit of interest, because there were then lots of reissues. So Vinyl on Demand, that German label that loved to do the big box sets.
Yes.
They did this one. This is from 2007. There's 600 copies of that one. But again, it's interesting. Vinyl on Demand, I think they sold out of those very quickly. Other labels who have done 300 copies but don't really do the publicity, they don't sell very quickly.
Right.
The same guy who'd done the bootleg did this album for us.
Is that up the middle, down the sides?
Yes.
Wow.
And then Steve Underwood, who at the time was pretty broke. He was working as a bus driver up in Notts. Anyway, he reissued one of the cassettes. This was the original cassette cover from 1980, and he reissued it on red vinyl. This is A Safe Substitute. And so we got some new stuff out, of course. So this was a solo thing I did 2012. Now, this was with, I don't know if you remember a blog. You know when blogs were big?
Oh, yes.
Mutant Sounds. And it was a blog which all those albums that you'd heard about but never been able to actually hear.
Yes.
They uploaded them all these ridiculously obscure things. Like, there's that thing called the Nurse with Wound list, which is a list of eclectic, sometimes unlistenable, but sometimes very interesting stuff. Anyway,
yes.
Uploaded all of that, and I got to in correspondence with them. Anyway, so we did this album of new material 2012. Other things.
So who put that compilation together, did you say? A guy called Steve?
Oh, well, the various ones that we've got. Vinyl on Demand, who did a Snatch Tapes compilation.
Yes.
This was the finer moments of Snatch 1, 2 and 3.
Yeah.
And also the people who A, wanted to agree to it, and B, I could get hold of.
Yes.
Some people didn't want to do it. Other people, you just could not get hold of them for love nor money. So Vinyl on Demand did that one, and they also did the Stormbugs one, which brought together the single and various other tracks.
Blimey.
And this, as I said, this was by the Fusetron guy, more Stormbugs. And this was a reissue, effectively, of the 1980 cassette. This was on Harbinger, Steve Underwood.
Right.
Who went on to be the Sleaford Mods manager, though he probably wouldn't want me to talk about that, so I won't. Yeah, at least I think he now lives in Hastings as well. All roads seem to lead to Hastings.
Yes, well, it's a fine city, town.
So
that's an amazing story. It's all quite fascinating, isn't it?
So in the noughties, there was a kind of, as I said, there was a whole slew of people. I'd get some sort of, mostly from Europe, though, or America. Not very often from the UK would we get any...
traction.
No, it was all... Maybe it was the same thing. Maybe it's the same thing that found Depeche Mode interesting. It was like, there's this curious British... I think there is a certain Anglophile angle sometimes to people liking this stuff.
Yeah, I remember as in the 80s, being very excited if John Peel played an obscure record from an American band or Australia. It was something
Yeah.
like I've discovered that, and that's really important, and they're going to be my band, and I'll be a bit disappointed if anybody else likes them. And I think it's a kind of curiosity that one had and sometimes still has about music that is quite exciting. But people who are pushing things in your face, you're thinking, please don't. Whereas you want to go off and
Yeah.
spend a bit of time.
You want
and
to
then
find your own
delve in.
thing.
You do. It's so important, isn't it? My God! So your music has really. I mean, did you ever play live at all? By the way,
this was just the last. That was the reprints, the Claire Thompson, Susan Vezey. That was reissued by Anomalous. Anyway, very, very little. So, as I said, whereas I listened to a few of the, interviews you've done with other people, and of course they're rightfully saying, "Oh yeah, I was in this band, and then we split up, and then we joined this band." There was none of that really, because it's all very studio based. I say studio, it makes it sound like I'm going to Abbey Road. It's sometimes just one man and his Revox. But Stormbugs did a couple of gigs. One of them round the back of the art shed, Maidstone College of Art, and another one in Brenchley Gardens. So this was one of those kind of all dayers,
right?
And I think Good Missionaries played, but we were completely under rehearsed. So we made the mistake of having a backing tape. I'd put together this rhythmical backing tape which we were going to play over there. It was a whole band. It was myself, Stephen, a woman on cello. David Jackman had been roped in to play Ezraj. I was supposed to be doing vocals. And I said to the sound guy, things didn't look good when we arrived, and the sound guy goes, "Oh, where's your drum kit?" I said, "Oh, we don't have a drum kit, but I've got this tape, percussive tape. Can you play that?" "Okay," he says. So we did a couple of numbers, and they were going down quite well. And the idea was that he was just going to let the tape roll, but he starts fast forwarding the tape.
Oh God, it's not a good moment, is it?
So you haven't got a clue where you were. So I think our set lasted about 20 minutes. But I do remember meeting some people in Maidstone, and they go, "Oh yeah, did you go to that Brenchley Gardens thing?" Yeah. So, there was this great band. I said, "Who was that?" I said, "Stormbugs." I said, "I was in that." "No, you weren't." So, yes. So, but anyway, we didn't carry on with it. I'm not quite sure why, because I used to go to gigs.
Yes.
I guess it was maybe because I'm not a natural guitar pianist or any of that. I mean, I don't know.
So what gigs were you going to sort of find yourself inspired during what was the first gig you went to anyway in your sort of younger days?
Well, the very first gig I probably went to, like a gig, would have been Chatham Town Hall. Now, I missed, David Bowie came through there in 1972. I missed that. I wasn't on the ball enough to get to that. Was legendary at school for years afterwards. I managed to go. A friend who lived 2 doors down said, "Come and see Mud. They're playing at Chatham Town Hall." So off we went. This would be about 72, 73, and we saw Mud, who did.
Brilliant.
They did all the hits. Tiger. It was actually good fun. They did like a rock and roll review. They did the hits, and then they branched into the classics. I can't remember exactly what they played, but everyone was dancing in the aisles. Other notable gigs would have been going to see Bowie at Earl's Court in 1978.
Nice. God, that was a good band.
That was the Thin White Duke one. That's basically the stage. And then because I was interested in all things experimental, I'd somehow picked up on Throbbing Gristle, and they used to send you stuff. And so I saw them probably more times than I should have. I saw them at Goldsmiths twice in some falling down place called the Centre I Buried.
And were you inspired by the sound and the vibe?
Well, they were doing... I mean, my feeling was a little bit... when punk came along, it was like this transformative thing. But actually, most punk bands was 3 chords, verse, chorus, middle 8, whatever. It was quite conventional.
Yes, very.
And you were kind of hoping for the rhetoric, the music to match the rhetoric. And really, the only things that did were what Throbbing Gristle did, and of course what Pill did on Metal Box. Pill. I know Lydon has his detractors now, and I can see why, but they really did push the envelope, didn't they, with those records? And what I liked about Throbbing Gristle was they didn't have a drummer or a bass. Well, they sort of had a bass player, but you know what I mean. They were making the kind of noise that I imagined one could be making. Having said that, it was interesting that they located themselves within pop music. I don't mean within the charts, but they could have just played. There was a whole electroacoustic scene at the time. For example, people who took themselves very seriously and performed at Sir John Smith Square in London, and were very much in the kind of Stockhausen. I'm using that as a shorthand. They probably wouldn't agree with that, but in that kind of way.
Yes.
Throbbing Gristle decided very much they weren't going to do that, didn't they? They were very much. They wanted public attention. That was Be Genesis Porridge, of course, P-Orridge. But but it was a mix of things. So, like, I used to go back. Grew up in the Medway Towns, and Stephen was there a couple more years than I was, and I used to go back there. And the Medway Towns was weird because it was in this weird time warp, because there was the whole Billy Childish thing. There was the milkshakes, pop ribbits, milkshakes,
the dentists.
Then there was the Rubberman Dozen. There was the Prisoners.
Oh yes,
there was this whole '60s thing going on.
I suppose it was the Prisoner, the mod thing, and the Prisoner, the series. People got into that imagery, didn't they?
And it was like punk. Punk had got going in '76. In '80, you're going to a pub in Rochester, and people like, "Oh, I've just got myself a mohair jumper." You're like, "You're 4 years out of date, mate."
Yes, there was a lot of mohair jumpers in the 80s. But
Billy Childish and whatever his incarnation was used to play very regularly upstairs in the pub or the MIC, and they used to put on quite a good show, and everyone would josh about, their stuff. It's like he's made how many albums? 60 albums, 70 albums?
A lot of albums.
Of variations on You Really Got Me. It's amazing how many tracks you can get out of that those simple riffs. But live, I've tried to listen to the records, but live it's actually quite good. It's sort of whatever. And, I saw other things like The Fall at the Astoria. They were very good. I used to go to a cross section of stuff, and then you'd have other things like I think Steve Reich came over and played in Islington somewhere and did the clapping piece and all of that stuff. So it was kind of a mix of. But why didn't so when we started having the reissues in the noughties, and then Steve Underwood did the red record, red vinyl one. He said, "Oh, well, do you want to play live?" To Stephen, and I said, we don't really have a set. It's not like we've got an old set from the 80s we can brush off, and I can get the Fender out of the attic and see if put some new strings on it. And he twisted our arms to do this gigging in Nottingham, which was actually I think the first gig. It was a curious thing. It was a whole weekender, and we were headlining for reasons I don't quite follow really. There was a New Blockaders, and I think really low down on the bill was one of the very first gigs by the Sleaford Mods.
Right.
So they got the last laugh.
Yes. And was that you and Stephen? And
yeah, that was just us with. We weren't really sure what to do because, as I said, we didn't have a set. So I kind of thought, well, what we could do was I could create some tape loops or digital versions of tape loops from those early recordings, and we could create that's what we did, and it sort of went down quite well. Yes. Anyway, Steve persuaded us to do a couple more gigs, and eventually Stephen started playing guitar. We went to Paris, and we went to somewhere in Belgium, and then we played at the Contrapop. Don't know if you've come across Contrapop, run by a guy called Kyle. I think he stopped doing it now, but it's down in Ramsgate on the beach.
Oh, was he in some band called Lucy's? Oh God, I can't remember.
I'm not sure. Scottish guy.
Perhaps that's not him then.
Kyle McCallum. It was nice. He got basically. He had a very utopian view that he'd organise these gigs on the beach. Well, one big gig in a big tent over a weekend, and he'd get some funding from the Arts Council or whoever. I'm not sure. And so it was free, but he could then get bands to come. So if you look up Contrapop, he's had some pretty tasty acts. And anyway, we played there. I'm still not sure if we'd quite nailed exactly what it was that we were doing live, in the sense of, in some ways, I preferred those. I talked about, I did a few things with the New Blockaders and Nigel, where we just basically do a kind of improv set in the early 80s in an old abandoned swimming pool or something, where we just go along, oh, look, there's a fire extinguisher, and we kind of just make some ad hoc sound, because those were very spontaneous.
Yes.
Whereas there was some slight, in a sense, it was also a little bit like I'm trying to recreate what I can do in a recording setting on stage. So it was a little bit lumpy. But anyway, yes. And so on the back of all of this, yes, there was lots of new stuff. I even thought I'd put a few more cassettes out. So with about a 40-year hiatus, we did some more 30 copies of this and that.
Blimey, you've kept the faith in your cassettes. And you and Stephen were you still making music and collaborate?
We did a kind of whole load of download singles, which, you know how these things come and go. For a while, a download single was a thing, and we called ours Dingles. Probably should have been called Shingles, but no. And then we compiled those together and did a CD compilation of those. And, you know, I mean, we probably had more coverage in The Wire than we should have, given that, you know, we're very kind of marginal outfit in some senses. But yeah, The Wire did a nice review and asked us to do one of those, you know, those things where they play you tracks and you respond to them and that kind of thing. But
did you work with Anna Domino at one stage? Did she?
No.
Oh, I don't know. I just saw something. I saw her name, as if that was somebody who'd worked with you, or she'd guested on one of your numbers, but not.
No, I don't think so. No.
Fair enough. Yes. So you and Stephen continue to make music and cassettes and release them.
Well, sporadically, I'd say sporadically. Yeah, I mean, I reactivated the Snatch Tapes thing, which was kind of more, you know, that was more my kind of thing. And I'd say, yeah, I did probably, how many of them are there here? 1, 2, 4 or 5 of these cassette releases. It was interesting to revisit it because my memory of the cassette was it's always fairly low quality. But of course, what was happening there was that people were sending me cassettes of their own stuff. I'd then have to dub it onto a tape and then be dubbed onto another tape. Whereas, of course, with the modern cassette, you take it straight off the computer. Yes. So you get it back and it's like, wow, that's pretty good, actually. There is this kind of school of thought that it sounds better if it's on cassette. Somebody tried to convince me that all top sound engineers are actually mastering to cassette, which I found hard to believe. But it does take that little, you know, you get that digital, you got that top end because it captures all those frequencies. And sometimes actually the cassette can't replicate those, takes those off.
Yes.
That does kind of smooth, makes the sound, you know, rounder and more analog and all those things that we like.
Because you've done a lot of material as yourself, haven't you? And not Stormbug. So where does that fit? Where does one begin and where does one end?
Well, as I said, the original Stormbugs was very much initially just me, partly because I was in London first. Stephen was back in the Medway Towns doing his art degree and things. And then the Tin single was very much a duo thing. And then when we restarted doing the stuff, initially the live thing, we did a single, didn't we? Oh, yeah, we did this. 2000, The Bugs Are Back. That was tongue-in-cheek.
Yes.
And And then we fell into a kind of pattern without discussing it, whereby I was doing the music and I'd almost like record almost a complete track, and then he would do the vocals and the lyrics. Now, quite why we settled on that, I'm not sure, because both of us are capable of doing both parts. You know, he can more than happy to do his own music, and I've done my own song-based thing. So quite why we fell into that pattern, I'm not sure, but it kind of seemed to work. But yeah, I would say the Stormbugs as a project is kind of sporadic. We did do another little single earlier this year. So, you know, each time the project looks like it's just about dead. But there's no life left in that car. There's no way.
And it just ticks over and fires up, and off you go.
Exactly, yes.
My God, have you built quite a cult following now?
I mean, what I did the last couple of years, but these things. Now, what is that? It looks like an LP. Well, it is an LP, but they're lathe cuts.
Right.
And I got approached by this guy in the Netherlands, and he said, "Oh, I run this little label. I'd never heard of it, but that's fair enough. So many little labels. We do these short runs of 25 copies, lathe cuts, each with individual artwork, and we sell them for £70 each. Each artwork's different." I was like, "Would you be interested in doing one?" I was like, "Okay then."
Yes.
So we did that, which is that's this one. Here we are. So you see, each album comes with a different picture.
Yes.
And then each, you know, lathe cuts. Each one's hand cut, one at a time.
Blimey. And yeah, so you get 30 of those printed.
Well, yeah, and how this worked with Astro Door was this label was he sends you half. You obviously make the music, you do the artwork, and then he sends you half, which you can then sell yourself, and he sells the other half.
Right.
And he's done quite a lot of these. I mean, the ones but you know, he's done some with the Nurse with Wound, who have, you know, it's like they're like Current 93. They have these very loyal followings.
What were they called?
Nurse with Wound.
Nurse with Wound.
And Current 93, they have these. I think they have followers who would pay £400 or £500 for a release.
Right. My God, these people have got money.
I hasten to add, my followers not so keen, but so I've done 2 or 3 of these, and this was the latest one that came out this year, called Buzzboosh, and this was a guy. This is actually, you know, I was saying about very limited interest in England. This guy, Steve Mountford, is actually based. I can't quite remember. Anyway, but he's in the UK, so that's the latest one. That was slightly different. I think he does 33 copies, and there's a guy in Wales who cuts them, who's apparently well regarded for such things. But whether that's the future of it, I don't know. You know, it's
kind of, I suppose it's quite interesting. It sort of puts a real value and appreciation, doesn't it, really, when you do it into that level. And if you are a fan and you just want something a bit more special, I suppose you're going to pay a lot more attention than just, I don't know, just being a bit frivolous and not really appreciating. Like, I mean, we all probably have, that's a sweeping statement, you know, a lot of MP3s that you got because you really wanted someone to give you those MP3s, or you got them somehow. But then you don't really value and listen to them with great love, do you? Unlike those singles that you bought when you were young with your pocket money and stuff like that.
I guess so. I think that is the general, you know, that's how the record shop industry has. You know, for a little while, it looked like the whole thing was out the window, didn't it? That, you know, the early noughties,
yes,
that vinyl was over effectively, but it underestimated. Like, there's a couple of quite active in Hastings independent record shops, and you know, quiet in the week, but in the weekend they're buzzing, mostly with blokes. And this is clearly a very important part of their lives, is going in there, checking stuff out. And I mean, they have both of the shops have a very eclectic mix of material, which, you know, I'd like to have had record shops like that back in the 80s and 90s, where even if you went up to Wardlaw Street, the choice was quite limited.
Yes.
Whereas these have great selections, but you can tell it's very much part of a particularly. There are some women in there. It's not all male, but it's predominantly a male thing. This, and as you say, people, despite the cost of living crisis, people seem to be, they don't come away with just one. They buy 4 or 5 different records. There's a
Wow.
I think it's those things where you see those YouTube videos where people have those walls of.
Yes, I know. I don't know. I mean, yes, I know. That I think during lockdown, I remember watching somebody constantly bringing all their latest albums out and being intrigued what ones they were. At the same time, that part of me thinking, my God, where do you get that money from? You're just, and you're happy to buy that. Whereas I'm still a little bit like, I could just listen to it,
As a maker of things, now that sounds a bit pompous and pretentious, but as a maker of things, that and having had that love of vinyl, yes, the first record is so exciting. That first Stormbugs record, the first time you have something, it's like, wow, it's on a record. It's just like, whatever. So, but at this point, that the recording is an audio file. 99% of new releases have been recorded digitally. They haven't been recorded on analog tape.
Yes.
So I do miss the sleeve notes. It is quite nice to sit down in a chair, have the record playing, and have the full, all of those cliches.
Yes. Oh God, absolutely.
But I'm quite happy to. It's maybe because I was I had 10 years where I was commuting up and down to London, and so I'd listen to stuff on the headphones, and so I got very used to. I'd load up. This was pre-Spotify, so I would load up the hard drive, as it were, with files. So before, there'd be like a choice. Okay, it's just this, and this. But it after the end of those 10 years, I kind of lost the desire then to listen to stuff. I kind of lost the vinyl thing because I still go into. I'm the worst shopper because I still go into the record shops and flick through the things because I like
there's something very.
I very rarely buy any things. I don't know if they see me coming and say, "Oh yeah, he's just going to look through the racks, isn't he?"
Yes, he's just going to pull out, look serious, and then put it back in. So it's kind of it's interesting, that kind of world of collecting. And also, one gets to an age you think, actually, trouble is. I mean, I'm not quite there yet, but the collecting and having stuff and then realising as we're all getting older, actually, I saw it in my dad, sort of had a lot of stuff and then was getting rid of stuff. And then, you have to slightly wonder. I mean, it's still quite nice. I in a way, still fantasize about that being really kind of value something. I still have that kind of, I wished I could really value stuff like I used to and have that fantasy when I'm a bit older in my retirement years, sort of buying that record and then consciously just putting it on and then just sitting there and listening to the whole thing from beginning to end and not sort of worried that I just spent £30 on the record or not. But I just know that I'll probably go, oh God, I hate that track. I'll just get up and play it. Oh, that's better. Oh no, I hate that track too. You know what I mean? It's that kind of, God, I wish I just streamed it. I've just, my pension's not going to fund this kind of hobby, is it? But, you want to remember that kind of interest and then discover it and play it to death for a month or two, and know every little thing about it. But whether one's going to be able to do that, I don't know.
Well, yeah. I mean, I as I said, I kind of managed to. I think it was. I had a modest collection, so probably only 200 or 300 or something like that. But I remember this would be well over 10 or 15 years ago. I was going through it one day, and I realised I had several copies of the same record, which I hadn't realised that I'd bought the same record again. Quite obscure-ish, not. And I was like, what am I doing? And I sort of kind of weaned myself off. As I say, I could still go into a record shop and flick through, but I've somehow managed to wean myself off the buying part. So not good for the future of the record shop. But I kind of like, oh yeah, I've got this fixed now. I don't actually need to take this home.
Yes.
Because there was a time back in those 80s and the 90s when the only way to hear the thing was to buy it, wasn't it? And as having a penchant for more experimental stuff, I remember numerous times I'd buy these albums by promising-looking obscure bands, and you pay whatever it was, £3 or £4 to get it home. It's like, Okay. Oh. Well, that track's all right. And then you play it again and again to try to, because
Yes. Oh God, no! I've done that so many. Well, the worst one was the album of the week that you thought, okay, I'm going to take a punt. It sounds amazing. You put it on.
yeah,
Think, oh my God, I hate it already. And it's like, oh my God, like you said, it was either $3.99 or $4.99 in those days. But at the same time, that was quite a lot of money because you didn't have it just readily available.
yeah.
But you've invested it, and you think, oh my. If only you could have listened to 10 or 20
Oh God,
seconds,
yeah.
it would have been perfect. But that you realise that journalist probably had been given lots of drugs and had been given a good night out by the artist or the PR guy, and it was like, shit, that's just a pain in the arse.
And as I say, you would still, unless it was absolutely the pits, you'd still play it quite a few times because actually the number of records you had might not be more than 30 or 40.
Oh yes, at the most we used to put them in some sort of vinyl case that we bought, and if you got really geeky, you'd put them in another plastic sleeve on top of that, so you didn't put your finger marks on the cover.
So what people are doing now is it's kind of weird. It's like, well, it's kind of quite hard to describe. But when you see a new record, it's not the same as it was originally, because of that. It's no longer the only. As I said, that was the only way to actually hear the music. You want to hear X, Y, Z, find the record and play it. That was literally the only way you could do it. Or you could buy the cassette as well. There was a cassette version. Whereas now, of course, it's an aesthetic choice, and people often have already heard. When I talk about these record shops, people have often already heard the record.
Yes.
Or already have it on CD, or already have a slightly different pressing of it. So it's kind of a very different. It simulates the experience that we had in the 70s and 80s, but it's not the same.
Yes, we're harking to an age, aren't we? But then it was weird because you had the vinyl, then we bought the CD, and then the CD aesthetically isn't great, so
no.
And then you go back to the vinyl, or you buy. It's kind of a mad world. And then you think, I'm not even sure I want to play that record again, but somehow you feel sometimes, God, I'd really just like to have it. Like you said, sometimes not to even play it, but just to pull that out, read the sleeve, and go, oh, look at that, just look at that, it's so beautiful, and then put it back and go, oh my God, that is, because it's an artwork, isn't it, as well?
Yeah.
That's the thing that I think we remember with fondness, like home taping is killing music, and play to maximum and all that kind of stuff, and these little scribbles and lyrics that you might find on there, and some bad printing, so the lyrics are on a color background, which clashes, that hadn't been thought through. But it was just lovely, it was really interesting. But you can't be 12 or 15 anymore.
Well, as you say, some of the people who now obviously are in their 50s, 60s, 70s in some cases, obviously are reasonably well off. So you've got this slightly perverse thing. With vinyl on demand, we were quite early in their early noughties, 2007 or whatever. But, they subsequently went on to do these very lavish box sets. And there's this kind of paradox or perversity almost of where music, which was maybe released on a handful of cassettes back in the 80s and maybe did 10 or 15 copies, now in this kind of lavish box set with 7 albums and a T-shirt and
all the outtakes that you could have.
And obviously experimental music is a bit different, but the Beatles, what was their total number of albums? 9 or something? I don't know. And you're like, can there really be 15 albums worth of interest? Some band from Sheffield. But having talked to the people who've got some of these box sets, they admitted that they haven't played all of the records.
Oh no,
they play a couple of them, so they're obviously something. Their shelves must be groaning with these.
Amazing. I know it is extraordinary when I get these press releases, and it's like, oh, this album's being reissued with with all the other kind of outtakes and live versions and mono and a stereo version, and you box it together and it's serious money. But then the inheritance has come through, hasn't it, in a lot of cases?
Oh, quite, yeah.
And all something else, downsizing. But it's probably not. It's probably like, oh, we've just been given some money, and God, I've always wanted to buy that box set, and off it goes, because You know, there you go. Get your Ramones T-shirt or CBGB's T-shirt, and I don't know, relive your youth. I guess it's all part of the process that we're going through in life.
Yes.
But interesting enough, on that level, I've gone back and listened to the music of the 80s that I missed the first time. I sort of realised, God, I'd miss, because you might sort of go, oh my God, I would love to hear that, but I have no chance. And then time passes, and then decades later, you can go back and listen to it, and it's like really interesting. So I don't go back and listen to the music that I was obsessed with, because it's like, no, actually, I'm sick. I love it, but I'm sick to death of it, and
Yeah.
I don't want to pretend I'm that age anymore. But actually, this new album or this album by a band that I've never come across before, and there's loads which would be embarrassing to admit, like The Sound or the Comsat Angels or Easterhouse, or all these bands that you thought, oh, that would be interesting. Oops, there you go.
Well, I even had a phase where which was a while back now, over a decade ago at least, where I listened, because in the 70s, you got the general gist. It was glam and then more experimentally Kraftwerk and things. And the bands which I always disliked intensely were things like Yes, Genesis.
Oh,
You're
in a prog world.
Before punk, I was completely against those. And I remember they would appear on the Old Grey Whistle testing. Like, what is this? Rubbish. Anyways, sometime in the noughties, I thought, I'll just give these things a go, and listen to Nursery Crime and yes, ridiculous lyrics and things. But actually, I thought, because the fight's over now, as it were, the battle's been won. Actually, there was a couple of things on the first 2 or 3 Yes albums. I quite like those, What's his name? Chris Squire with his
bass, Steve Howe, Rick Wakeman, the lyrics of John Anderson. Well, actually, I have to confess, my brother was into the prog world, and I was at that age where I'd sneak into his room to that record case that he had and play these records. And also, he did that great thing of saying, "Don't go into my room and play my records."
So yes.
So obviously, and this was like music that wasn't in the charts. No one talked about it, but I was just like, God, this is interesting, And there was some heavy metal. There was, Black Sabbath, Deep Purple, Rainbow, Richie Blackmore's. But those Genesis albums, especially Yes, I loved them, and a few others at ELP that were just kind of curious, and even the solo work of Rick Wakeman I loved. So, but then you kind of think, actually, I'm kind of sick of this now, because you have to spend 10 minutes listening to The Heart of the Sunrise for that last minute to this great finale. And, oh, that is so meaningful. Oh, I love it. And, it felt so brilliant. But again, music for boys and men, but not really.
Well, quite, yes.
You try to say, because there's this thing about the mixtape, isn't it? Did you give people a mixtape and all that? The amount of work that you put into a mixtape to somebody that you fancied, and you had to sort of spend ages getting the right tracks. And, prog rock was never going to win you over.
It wasn't going to cut this.
It wasn't going to get it wasn't going to get you into slight romantic relationships.
There's that whole boy thing of feeling that you had to impress the other half or whatever with your musical choices, which does.
Yes, they'll love that. She'll love Stairway to Heaven, because it should be. But actually, you need to get discoed and slow dances, don't you? Not Led Zeppelin. That's just. Anyway, that's so you look. So just briefly then, obviously, Stormbugs and your world. So what was your day job then? How did you then navigate that little number?
Well, as I said, in the 80s was a mishmash of the signing on, the Enterprise Alliance, and quite a long period. I mean, I worked at BT on a kind of semi-temp basis for probably 2 or 3 years, but in kind of 6-week to 3-month snatches.
Yes.
And then in the 90s, I got involved with these arts organisations. And for a bit, for example, I wrote reviews for Art Monthly, which is a kind of magazine that, as the name describes, it does reviews and features on contemporary art. And then I ran a gallery called Camera Work in Roman Road, East London, for a while, obviously photography based. And then I started lecturing. And so probably from 2003-4, I was kind of lecturing in various places, and then sort of 10 years I was at London South Bank University.
Right.
So And
What was your subject you were lecturing in?
Well, I was originally brought in because of this experience in art galleries and things to teach these various modules on an arts management course in, how to curate exhibitions and that kind of thing. And I kind of branched out into other modules and things. I did also do some more practice-based ones, like the moving image practice and that kind of thing. Interestingly, at South Bank, they did have a sound design course, like the sort I said, that would have been great if I could have done that when I was 18, but they didn't exist. Yes, I was. You know what it's like, it's silos, because I was in this arts management thing,
right?
And I think they were a little bit sniffy because I've clearly done more music than most of the people who were teaching on the sound design course. I mean, some of them had some celebrity of having been involved in something with Factory Records way back when, but most of them were not making music. Or some of them were. That's a bit unfair, but they were a bit like, "Oh, we don't want this guy. He's done too much. He's done too much stuff. He could stay over there in his arts management. What is that? What is that anyway? That sounds boring.
With his Excel spreadsheets.
That sounds boring. Let's leave him over there." So, but yeah, it did provide. I mean, you could. That's good. That is the good thing with the laptop. You could get up early and record something between 6:30 and 7:30, and then go off and do your lectures.
Yes, because that's fantastic, actually. So, are you still doing it, or have you?
No, I stopped in about 3 or 4 years ago. Sort of pretty much coincided with the sort of pandemic and a reshuffle at they're all the universities are trying to basically unload as many lecturers as possible.
Yes.
So yes, I was kind of shuffled out of there, which was a bit earlier than I wanted to be. But you have to go with that sort of flow. So it's given more time for creative projects.
Well, yes, absolutely. Actually, it's kind of I mean, I know we're all sort of creeping towards our little retirement age, aren't we?
I know, it's all a bit depressing, isn't it? But
it's a bit odd. But yes, but definitely still making music and doing lots of little projects on that.
Yes. I mean, I'm doing quite a lot of visual art projects, collage and things. I mean, on the back of one of those albums that I was showing you, the lathe cut, what happened there was I'd said to the guy from Astray Door, I said, "Oh, yeah, I do 33 different album covers, no problem." And I had this idea of this particular picture, and I was going to do 33 variations on it. And I'd already done 3 or 4. But then when I started doing them for the album cover, I got to about number 4, and I was like, "Oh, God, this isn't working." Because whereas previously I'd done variations just of my own free will, this was a bit like, you have to now produce 33 variations. And I could think, this is not going to work. So I sort of scrabbled around, and I tried this, and I thought, tried that. And then I remembered that, between 76 and 82, I did a lot of collage. Everybody did in the punky kind of days. It wasn't unique. I thought, I'd try a bit of collage. Anyway, it didn't work for the album cover, but it got me back into doing collage. And after years of being on the computer, she said, "Well, so I'm skeptical about the analog vinyl thing. I'm not skeptical about if you've been using Photoshop for years and then suddenly you start cutting up bits of paper and sticking them on, it's like, wow, this is so much more fun."
Right.
With the mouse, you're moving the thing and it never quite goes where. And like with Photoshop, you can only ever get it slightly wrong. Whereas with the collage, you cut things. That's quite exciting.
Yes, I do remember that in the 90s, actually doing a lot of collage. And yes, just... Yeah, you do a piece. Actually, that was it. That was when suddenly photocopies became groovy. So you do an A3 and then you get it blown up into this really big poster. And I do remember, someone do it and you think, right, I'm having a go at that now. It's like, I'm doing, and it was like, we all started doing these kind of exciting and weird and wonderful collages with, yes, that was, a good time, actually. Yeah, but photocopies are, the photocopy was just such an amazing resource, isn't it?
It was. I do remember the first time when I first went to Goldsmiths, this would be 78, there was a halls of residence, and it had a photocopier in the hall. And of course, I hadn't really had a photocopier at school, I don't think. And I remember I had a friend, sort of drinking friend, really. Anyway, he came to me one day and he said, "Oh, look," and he'd basically taken off his trainers or whatever and put them on the photocopier and photocopied them, and he passed me this photocopy, and I was like, "Oh wow, you can blimey, you can. Oh goodness.
Yes.
I hadn't really appreciated that you could stick a 3-dimensional object on there or whatever. I just sort of viewed it. I hadn't really thought about it. I thought it was a way to put on documents and get copies that it could be a sort of art. So anyway, yeah, lots of projects still going on. Yes.
Fantastic.
Yes.
And are you still doing work with, and is Stephen still on the scene?
Oh yeah, he's it's interesting because he, as I said, part of the Stormbugs thing, he, for the last couple of gigs that we did, which is a way back now, he was playing guitar. Yeah, he's doing quite a lot of solo stuff. I think he's got a new thing coming out sometime this year on his Bandcamp thing, or maybe Dimple Discs or something like that. Yeah, so he does these quite, I suppose I should be careful how I describe them, but they're quite stripped back, basically with him, just the guitar, electric guitar normally, and vocals.
Oh.
So yeah.
So he does stuff on Dimple Disc Records.
Did he do, he either did one himself or he did one with Jude Montague. Was that on Dimple? I can't remember.
Right.
Crumpsall Riddle. Maybe that was her. Anyway, he was doing a lot of stuff with non-linear. What's that label? Richard Sanderson had this little label. They do these mini releases. But yeah, if you just Google Stephen Ball Bandcamp, you'll find a whole slew of
all his work. Oh God, yeah. It's just amazing excitement, isn't it? I do find actually most people from that period, the 80s, I don't know what other decades were like, but who were in that indie world have still,
I know,
beavering away. They just are beavering. Now they're starting to get a bit more time back on their hand. It's like
can't make them shut up.
It's like, right, that's it. We're going to be doing this again, and they've all, they're setting their sights on a very slightly lower. They're not worried about it, but selling much, or even playing in front of that many people. But they're just very excited by it. And
I think a lot of those local scenes. I mean, like Stephen does play some of these songs live because it's not difficult in the sense that they were recorded with him and the guitar. So it's not like he's trying to replicate something that's been overdubbed. And I think because he's lives in New Cross, Deptford, and I think there's quite a good little scene there.
Right.
My feeling is it's a small scene, but it's mutually supportive. I think, which can be, I mean, we're well past appearing on Top of the Pops and hoping for that breakthrough into some fictional
moment. Yes, I know. It's like, don't depend on it for your pension, really. But
not at this point, no.
Not at this point. But I have to say, I love that picture of the two of you on your Wikipedia page. It's such a it's time, isn't it?
Greenwich Park, circa 1979-80. Yes,
it's such a great photo. The duffel coat.
Oh God, yes, I had a duffel coat thing then.
Who didn't?
I know. You always thought it made you look like David Bowie from the cover of Low, but it just made you look like everybody else in the duffel coat.
Well, that's before you discovered the Army and Navy stalls and started getting sort of long coats and big boots.
Serious X when Army surplus was dirt cheap, unlike now where it's like, hang on a minute. This is more expensive.
Right. No, I haven't visited one since the 80s, but it was absolutely essential fashion, wasn't it, really?
Yeah.
But anyway, we never had central heating on in the house, so you had to have a big boots and big socks, and just to try and survive each winter, really. So,
well, yeah,
it was hard work. But yes, look. Well, thank you ever so much. It's been an amazing insight into your musical journey, which
my little corner of the universe here.
Well, it's still rocking, actually, and and so many little kind of moments there.
Well, I thought actually, because I was trying to get the laptop set up because I don't do much Zoom stuff now. I thought I better get it set up. And I thought, I better get some records out, and because they're in the box over there. So, God, there are quite a lot of these buggers.
Yes.
You know,
I remember once we did a book, a project, and we were involved in this event, which was, you know, really successful, and we loved doing it, and we thought everyone was in it. So we thought we'd do a book, and, you know, and people would be really
Yes.
excited by this book, and so we did it, and we spent the whole winter putting it together and getting lots of interviews with people and putting all the pictures. It was fantastic. And we went to the printers, and they said, you know, you can get 500, or for a bit more, you can get 1,000. You think, oh, yeah, I'm sure we'll be able to shift 1,000. That extra 500 were the ones under the bed for a long time. You know, it was like and actually people just wanted to pick it up, flick through, and go, "Oh, this is lovely, yeah, great," and put it down. Or, "Oh, do you think you'll do another one?" It's like, fuck's sake.
Well, there is the whole. I mean, like, since I've been doing this collage things, there's kind of quite a few little galleries around here, and there's this whole thing of, you know, you can join. There's one of them which is very much. It's called the Arts Forum. You join, you pay £35 a year, and then if there's a show, you have to pay another bit. But, you know, got all these people taking their work along, all hoping to sell to some fictional person. You know, it's like, I mean, there's a lot of artists and arty people in Hastings, but not very many people who want to spend £200, £300, £400, £500 on a picture, or have that money. Or if they did, they'd probably rather spend that on going to a holiday to Bali or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So there's all these micro. I usually get a thing sometimes of thinking certain types of activity are quite bourgeois, because you're like, well, who can really afford to pay, you know, £120 a week minimum for a studio, and then blah 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 blah. And it's like, oh yeah, okay, this is quite a bourgeois activity. But I think with music, music has always tried to keep that thing, that the idea that you can sell a multiplicity of something and therefore keep it quite cheap. Now, the lathe cut's obviously the antithesis of that. It's more like kind of fine art print. But, you know, even with people who are quite well regarded, you know, that they're only printing up maybe 1,000 albums. So the market, I know each year we keep hearing the vinyls going up, there's more people making blah 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 blah, and there is, but it's still quite modest. It's nothing like the, you know, and it never will be anything like the 70s, you know, with or even the 80s. I was watching some, can't remember how I got there. It was to do with the synth parts in Thriller, which was kind of mildly interesting. But anyway, the thing was that once Thriller got going, it was selling 1 million copies a week.
Yes, I know.
It's not 1 million streams a week. 1 million actual people, you know, going to the shop and saying, "Can I
buy Thriller?" And yes, I know. It's and even those indie charts, you know, you realise how many people are, you know, like they're buying the Smiths albums or New Order, and you think, God, that was a serious amount of records, wasn't it? That was, you know, for the indie charts, they wouldn't even touch the top 50, and, you know, the Duran Durans and Shardays.
You know, the Neu out, you know, the German band Neu.
Yes.
And I think their albums did reasonably well, but they sold 50,000 copies in the UK, and that was considered a failure by United Artists. You know, that was like 50,000, forget it.
You know, yes. I mean, yeah, you're not even going to get a Christmas card for that, you know. But now people would be like, "My God, you're bigger than Adele," you know. And you would have thought that, playing at the Sphere in Las Vegas. But yes, but now it's all changed, hasn't it? It's so tricky.
Anyway,
but yes,
onwards and upwards. Yes,
that's absolutely. It's the only way, as they. But look, thank you ever so much. This has been amazing, and I'll send you a link if you want, and then you can put it on your Facebook page. Anyway, look, have a lovely day or evening. Take care.
Bye.
Bye. And that, dear listener, is the end of the interview. A massive thank you to Philip for giving me the time for that interest and insight into his musical life. This has been the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. If you want to contact me, you can on all those social media platform sites. Just do C86 show and my name. And all these interviews have been archived on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. It's true. Have a great week. Stay safe.